Welcome to the Brian Piergrossi podcast. That's me, Brian Piergrossi. Aaron Nichols with me out of Boulder, Colorado. Welcome, Aaron.
Thanks, Brian. It's a pleasure to be here.
We were just talking about what do you do? What do you? It's kind of a. I always when it's challenging to answer that question, I always have more respect for the person than when it's not. Right? It's like
nice.
He's a free man that does what he wants. But I was saying that.
Yeah.
I think of you as an investigative journalist because I came into your writings through Facebook, and this was probably, I would say, the spring, and you were just sharing some writings that were really, to me, were really lucid and really inquiring into what's happening and really asking some great questions and inviting people to dive deeper below the kind of mainstream narrative of what's happening. And I know you got a lot of how many shares do you think some of those posts? Probably hundreds, thousands?
Thousands on a few of them. I think probably up to like 7,000 or something on a couple of them.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, maybe actually one of them, which was not related to the pandemic, I think I'd have to check, but I think it got up to like 20,000 shares.
Mm-hmm.
That was about the Starlink thing, the low Earth orbiting satellites.
Cool.
Yeah.
And I think there was such a longing. I mean, there was kind of this felt sense that something wasn't right, and it was confusing, and people were kind of looking for something that would. I think you hit it at the right time, and you, like I said, your writing was really lucid and clear, and so I think that you really catalyzed something that people were wanting to connect to.
Yeah.
And you just kind of been doing that since then. As I've followed your work, you've been kind of just exploring, what the mainstream media has given us, questioning it, sometimes providing some alternative truths or facts or potentialities, things people can dive into. Mm-hmm. So what made you question what was happening? And then when did you start questioning it? Because I recall I was thinking about this recently. I went to Thailand in January, and we spent 2 months in Thailand.
I was in Thailand in January too.
Yeah? That doesn't surprise me somehow. What part of Thailand?
Koh Phangan.
So was I.
What?
Yeah.
No way,
Koh Phangan. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually spent about 6 months of the past, well, probably last year, 2019, I spent about 6 months there.
What a great place, huh?
Yeah.
I was feeling like that was the winter home.
Uh-huh.
I don't think it's going to be this year. From what I understand, they're closed until January at least now. Thailand is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I was there. Sounds like you were there too. And people were talking about this coronavirus, even at that time. But at that time, it was just in China, So I remember thinking, why are they giving so much attention to something happening in China? Just a few people are being affected by it. Like, it seems really, really strange that this thing is getting so much, because the American media is infamous for only focusing on America. They don't talk about other, rarely do they go into other countries, things happen in other places. But it was like every day it was like this virus in China, this virus. And I was so I'm reflecting back, and I'm like, even back at the very beginning, it was like this strange media obsession. It's almost like, there was this idea of we're going to talk about this, and this is going to be the biggest thing, and we're going to make this a top headline every night, and it's been that way since then. Yeah. So I'm just curious, what your kind of process was as this was coming into the news, and how you were looking at it, how you're feeling into it.
Well, I've been investigating things that the average person isn't supposed to know about. I can say that earnestly. I think there are certain things we're not supposed to know about. for a very long time. And I had really, I mean, I've kind of gone through phases with it. But I can say that last year I was not in that mode at all. I was really focused on other things. By the way, to sort of answer your question, yes, it's hard for me to define like what I do. And I noticed in a recent podcast of yours, you were kind of, you answered the question also sort of like, I don't know. I mean, sometimes I say this, sometimes that. And I can definitely relate to that. But I've been focused on entrepreneurship mostly for the last several years. And then last year, having been liberated from my last business, I decided to focus on writing more, but I was writing about completely different things. So when this pandemic thing started, yeah, I was in Thailand at the time. And I was also like, what, this doesn't seem like it's as big a deal as they're making it. I remember making a Facebook post that was like, you know, me on the airplane with no mask and like all these other people who were not afraid to travel and, you know, be in close quarters. And I remember also actually posting that and then realizing, oh, I'm not actually being very empathetic here to people's fear because people were really afraid. And, but I really underestimated how big this thing would get, as probably most people did. And then, you know, shortly after I returned to the United States, there was the first, you know, 2-week lockdown thing.
Yeah.
And
when did you get back? March?
I don't remember the exact timeline, but I think it was February.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think it was within a week or two of being back that this thing started. So, and that was probably March. This thing being the lockdown.
The lockdown in the US.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. And so here's the thing, man. I haven't been sick in over a decade because I'm super into like self-healing and alternative medicines and basically doctoring myself. And I've been taking high dose vitamin C for years. And so I'm like, okay, some sort of new cold like virus. Actually, you know what? There was, it's a little more complicated than that. But a large part of me was like, okay, a cold like virus, whatever. You know, it's not really a big concern for me because I know I'm not going to be susceptible to that. However, having been aware of for years the fact that there is that there are biological weapons that have been produced by our country and other countries for a long time, I actually did exercise some caution, just considering like, who knows what this is? It could even appear to be some sort of, you know, cold type virus or flu type virus, but even have some other kind of mechanism that's engineered into it. I didn't know. And so I, you know, was actually in the beginning, like encouraging my partner, like, let's wear masks, let's use hand sanitizer, let's be careful because who knows what the hell we could be infected with that even could possibly not show its real effects for years to come. Who knows? Then, you know, as we all got more information about it, I became less concerned. It did seem to be more like a flu or cold type of thing. And again, because of my own vitamin and other supplement regimen that I feel very confident in, I was just like, all right, I don't really have much to be concerned about. And then I started writing about it.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to add too, I think at that time, it's important to note that I believe the projections that the models they were putting out were 3.5% death rate. You know, that's what sent all the lockdowns in the US and everything into place was this model.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that's one, so talking about sense making, right?
Yeah.
So here's something interesting. The first thing you know is models aren't what's actually happening, right? Yeah. So this is one thing that gets conflated all the time. It's like, who's making these models, right? What's their agenda? What's their reason for making the models? And it's like, well, this is the model of what could happen in the future. So now we have to do all blah, 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 blah. You know, and it's just important to recognize that as we see from 3.5% to less than 0.1%, you know, the models are just models. And, you know, are these models corrupted, which in this case I believe they were, by the people that are creating them for an agenda of what they want to fulfill. So essentially, you're helping me to like kind of like go back and look at how, because I'm like, how did this get from to point A to where it is now, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that model, I think, it was predicting like over 2 million deaths in the United States.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
That was, oh my God. I mean, I did so much research back then. I could, I can recall some details, but I won't get them all exactly right now because it's been several months. But that model was produced, I believe, by a guy named Ferguson.
Yes, Neil Ferguson.
Neil Ferguson, who was infamous already for creating wildly inaccurate models.
Yeah.
And the university, which I'm not recalling.
I think it's London. He's based out of the UK. I know that.
Definitely UK. But I think the same month that model was produced, they received like millions of dollars in funding from the Gates Foundation.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because, I don't know, much about your audience, but I imagine people are fairly open-minded to these kinds of things, but
we'll find out.
Yeah.
Imperial College of London.
There you go. Right.
So I'm thinking of the Joe Rogan podcast. I'm going to be Joe and Jamie. I'll look up the information.
Nice. Nice. So, yeah, I mean, that model was wildly inaccurate. That was, I think, pretty quickly shown to be inaccurate. Yeah. And even not considering lockdown measures and all of that.
Another interesting note about Neil Ferguson was that, so they had this, full lockdown in the UK, social distancing, don't leave your house. This was back when it don't leave your house, social distancing. This was like kind of end of March, beginning of April. So Neil Ferguson, the guy that put the model out, gets caught having an affair.
I know.
It's supposed to be an open marriage or whatever, but he gets up having sex with another woman, and he lost his position and his everything. So, it's just interesting how the people that push these things the strongest are the ones that don't follow the very things that they're telling us to push because they know they're not legitimate.
Yeah, he was the original Pelosi. And then did you see the photo of Fauci at the baseball game with no mask on? Yeah. Next to, I think he was between his wife and a friend, but that was interesting. Yeah. So I started looking into it all, man. And I mean, obviously I come from a pretty skeptical place with regard to public health orders and really the medical establishment in general.
Right.
And a lot of that goes back to, like we talked before about vitamin C. And I mean, that's just kind of one, to me, understanding vitamin C is kind of a red pill when it comes to not just the medical establishment and institutional medicine, but it can open up the question of what else are we not being told? Because, it's like the average doctor is, I mean, even with the best intentions, I'm not saying like doctors are, evil or anything. Although I've heard some other people suggest that, considering a lot of them are going to be more motivated by profit and sort of their good standing in the medical community than they are by actually practicing good medicine. And I know that's not the case for all doctors, but people are motivated by those basic pressures of like financial incentive and also just social their reputation and status and social acceptance. But anyway, the average doctor will tell you, vitamin C has never been proven to cure anything. You can't absorb, more than this amount, so you shouldn't really take anything more than the USDA recommended dosage, and like you're just going to flush it out, and all of this stuff, which I mean has a kernel of truth in it. But the reality is that vitamin C is probably the most studied medicine or substance in all of medical science. There are over 65,000 peer-reviewed papers on PubMed that are either directly about vitamin C or that mention vitamin C. I mean, it's so widely studied, and yet most doctors just are completely ignorant of what it actually does and how effective it can be in preventing and fighting disease. So, I mean, that right there is something that, like, for me, I mean, years ago when I first learned about high dose vitamin C, what they call megadosing, you know, I'm a relatively brave person, I guess, and I'm like willing to experiment on myself, and I'm kind of always questioning authority and things, and so I was willing to do it. Most people would think that the dosages of vitamin C that I take are insane, but I discovered that it actually keeps me from getting sick. You know, and that is like, wow. So we're looking at all these people. I mean, just from that perspective, again, kind of as a red pill, it's like, in my own experience, going from being, you know, a normal sort of person who gets sick a few times a year throughout my life to then never getting sick again, you know, for the last 10, 12 years, something like that.
And what's the dosage that you take?
I've experimented with different things. Lately, as I've actually done more research on vitamin C recently, I've started taking more. And I've learned a lot recently, actually. So before, it was mostly like I got a little bit of information in the beginning, and then I just kind of ran with that and experimented with myself. And now I've actually looked a lot more at the science. So for me, currently, I'm taking about 6 grams a day. It is a formula that includes some bioflavonoids. It's buffered with calcium and magnesium, which allows you to take a lot more at one time without having any kind of digestive upset, which, you know, is one of the things that prevents people from taking a lot at one time. Is because if you took, like, yeah, as I'm doing, like 3 grams of straight ascorbic acid, it might hurt your stomach. It's not going to do any like real damage, but it would be uncomfortable. Whereas I can take, of this stuff that I do take, that I've been taking for over a decade, I can literally take 8 grams at a time and experience no digestive pain or upset whatsoever. So yeah, currently, just as a maintenance dose, I'm taking 2 doses of 3 grams per day. Yeah, and I feel great. And actually, I even experimented recently because I was watching, I've been getting into Thomas Levy's work and reading his books and watching interviews with him. And he's kind of like the main proponent of vitamin C, probably internationally. And it's not like he's the only guy who knows this stuff. He just happens to be the most vocal. And I think he's done a great service in getting other medical doctors to open their eyes and start experimenting with stuff. But what was I going to say about Thomas Levy? Yeah, so he was talking about how most of us are actually living with infections that we're not aware of.
Yeah.
And a major thing is dental infections. Supposedly up to 95% of dental infections are asymptomatic. Like, you just would have no idea unless you do a 3D X-ray. But whether it's dental or in some other part of the body, and he even said, like, you know, you could get a cold, and then even though the symptoms go away and you feel fine, that it's still at some level lingering for months, and your body is still fighting that. And so the thing with vitamin C is that, you know, when you've taken more than your body can absorb, when you hit what they call bowel tolerance, which means that you get loose stool, you can even like get full-on diarrhea, you know, to varying degrees. And so that's when you know, okay, I've taken more than my body can absorb. No problem. It's just going to flush out. It's not, you know, you're not hurting yourself. And so I decided, like, because usually I won't take more than 3 at a time, 3 grams at a time, unless I'm feeling some sort of symptoms. And the other night I was like, I'll just take 6 and see what happens. My body completely absorbed it. No, I didn't hit the bowel tolerance. And so you know, it's just interesting that, like, who knows what I could have been fighting or what I might be fighting on an ongoing basis. And all of us, I mean, when you look at all of the chronic illness that people experience, you know, and so much of this, it's like symptoms are popping up where there could be a much deeper underlying, you know, issue that will become, you know, express itself here as like this disease or that disease. But, you know, at a baseline, I think our general health is actually pretty poor. I mean, you know.
And in America, it's more poor than, you know, many other places in the Western world anyway. You know, we have really, our diets are really poor, obesity levels really high, drug abuse, alcohol abuse. You know, you go to, for people that don't know, you go to Thailand. I don't think I saw a single fat Thai person.
No.
In
Well,
2
no,
months.
I
You might have seen one, but I don't recall seeing a single person. Maybe I saw one or two.
Yeah,
But,
there are a few.
but I believe we're over 50% in America as
Uh-huh.
far as people who are overweight. I'm almost sure we're over 50% people who are overweight in America, adults, and it's increasing in children.
You know, that's another thing I do just want to mention, though, just to sort of add a little bit more empirical evidence to the vitamin C topic, is that, like, yes, I was actually raised with a fair amount of health consciousness, like fed way less sugar than most kids. Like, I got a good start as far as like my immune system and general health. But I mean, as soon as I was in my late teens and through, you know, the first half of my 20s, I ate, you know, drive-through food, did a lot of drugs, smoked a lot of alcohol, barely slept. You know, and of course those things contributed to me getting sick when I did as well. And I did start to turn those things around a bit when I, around the same time that I started vitamin C megadosing. But to note, I've still averaged 5.5 hours of sleep since then, which is not good for one's immune system. You know, I still smoke organic tobacco, you know, which to a lot of people is like, oh my God, terrible thing for your health. You know, you're gonna get sick. Point is, I don't have like a perfect diet. I don't take care of myself perfectly. Nonetheless, I've been able to avoid getting sick, you know, and I'm not like living in a bubble. I very much attribute my general good health to vitamin C. Also a decent diet. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to put that in there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, to me, I mean, this is the thing that's been frustrating with WHO and, you know, Dr. Fauci and all these people that come on camera, is obviously if there's a virus, the only cure for the virus is your immune system, you know, and it's like, they don't even talk about like ways to, I believe there was like a little something when he was asked, maybe something recently in the last few weeks, and then he kind of poo-pooed that. But yeah, it's like, that's what, right off the bat makes you very like kind of suspicious. Like, why aren't they telling people like, there's no, I mean, there's all kinds of ways you can build your immune system to fend off a virus or to deal with a virus or bacteria. You know, so there's vitamin C, there's zinc, vitamin D, so the whole vitamin and mineral realm. And then there's just lifestyle stuff, you know, but you can't make money off of lifestyle stuff.
Sure, right. Yeah, and also, of course, I mean, stress is a huge factor in disease. And, you know, obviously this whole situation, even just the threat of some terrible novel virus is going to stress people out. But yeah, that's the thing. That was one of the pieces that I wrote, you know, early in the pandemic, was kind of about this question of like, so if these people are supposedly care about our health, why isn't everyone well educated about nutrition, you know, and their immune system? And why don't we have public programs providing, you know, vitamin supplementation and Yeah,
Exercise, places to exercise, and fresh
yeah,
air, and get connected. It was like everything was the opposite,
yeah,
and to some degree still is. Everything's the opposite of what builds your immune system. It's like everything to like lower your immune system, weaken your immune system. I even, to
exactly.
me, even the idea of isolating, of quarantining, isolating for months and months and months. Um, to build an immune system, to build your immune system strong, you have to have exposure to germs.
Yeah,
Otherwise, your immune system just atrophies. Just like a muscle in your body. If you're not using them, if I'm not using, if I'm not, using my muscles, the muscles just atrophy because they need to be used to be strong and vital. So, I mean, I think that that's another thing that I don't actually agree with that. I mean, I understand if you're immunocompromised or there's certain people in certain situations, but if you're young and you're fairly healthy, I mean, expose yourself to germs to to build your immune system.
totally. And yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that's true scientifically. I don't have evidence for it, but it makes sense to me. But then um, I've been following this guy Chris Martinson's COVID coverage for several months. Are you familiar with him?
No.
Peak Prosperity YouTube channel, and he's really interesting because he started out at the beginning like super cautious, like yes, we need to lock down and wear masks, and then he has really sincerely followed the science and changed his perspective as we've gotten more information. And yeah, I mean, his perspective now is that we have pretty much reached herd immunity. And but that's back to what you were saying about like being exposed to different pathogens and each other. Like then we build herd immunity much quicker, like by continuing to lock down. I mean, at this point it might even be like irrelevant with regard to herd immunity because we may have already reached it, which really calls into question why are the lockdowns happening. But even months ago, it's like, yeah, let's protect the people who are most vulnerable. But the rest of us, like actually by socializing with each other, theoretically, according to him and the science that he's followed, we could have reached herd immunity much quicker, like Sweden did.
Yeah.
By healthy people actually passing the germ around.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. This whole question, there's so many things that just, talking about critical thinking are just not questioned, or they're not, like this whole idea of we have to slow the spread. I saw that you posted something, I'm not sure how far back it was, but the original idea was we have to slow the spread so the hospitals aren't overwhelmed, and then you're like, okay, well, that makes sense. If there's somewhere where they're overwhelmed, and that was like 6 months ago, it's like, why are we, what is the point of slowing the spread? I like to quicken the spread, like you're talking about. So just so many things that are strange, like, you can't stop a virus. Why do you want to slow the spread? So then if I listen to people that are really connected to the news, what they'll say is, well, we want to slow the spread for the vaccine. Because the vaccine is going to make everything, all of a sudden everything's just going to be perfect once the vaccine comes,
People are so conditioned to that idea, just like that faith in the silver bullet of a vaccine. Yeah, I mean, it's highly questionable. But the crazy thing too about like the hospital overwhelm, I have a little anecdotal story to add on top of this, but it's really interesting. Like I don't know, a few months ago, it was probably, I imagine in June, there was that little documentary made by Journeyman Productions with the nurse who came to New York from Florida to work in what was the most heavily hit area of New York and the most heavily hit hospital. So it was like the epicenter of the epicenter in the United States. And she was compelled to go on record saying, like, we are killing these people. Most of these people don't need to be here. People are coming in who are not infected and they're getting infected here. And then we're intubating them and they're dying. And, you know, so it's like when we look at these crazy, you know, death rates that we were seeing in New York, and these people, you know, who are dying in the hospital, she wasn't the only person who was saying, we are killing these people, you know? And one of the really interesting things she said was that a lot of people were coming in with panic attacks, shortness of breath, you know, heart rate's probably elevated, but they're like, oh my God, I have COVID. You know, that's what they think, and they're panicking. And then they put them in a bed next to someone who has COVID, and they get COVID, then they go through the course of treatment and they die. So that was interesting. And then like maybe a month later, I was talking to a friend in New York, and he was like, oh man, my brother just got rushed to the hospital today with COVID symptoms. I was like, oh shit, man, I hope he's all right. And then I think the next day I checked in with him, how's your brother doing? And he was like, well, it turned out he was just having a panic attack. You know, so how many people actually went to the hospital, this hospital overwhelm? How many people were just panicking? And that's the other really interesting thing about illness in general, is how much of it is either psychosomatic or psychogenic. And when you tell people, when people are constantly getting the message, there's this terrible virus that's gonna, you know, if you get it, it's gonna kill you. I mean, you know, people who don't have a lot of confidence in their own ability to, you know, self-heal or just maintain good health. I mean, I can't imagine. I would be terrified too. And I do think that actually, you know, I can't offer any evidence to support it right now, but I do think there is a hell of a lot of evidence for much of disease being psychogenic, you know, or psychosomatic.
Really important point. I mean, I think it's a really important point. And again, this is not something that's talked about. The media obviously is perpetuating the fear, the anxiety, the fear. We can talk about why that is. But I mean, fear and anxiety make you sick. If it's consistent over day after day, week after week, it lowers your immune system. Stress, worry, you know, this is just, again, common sense. We all know this. And if you're perpetuating people with that, so, you know, for me, my consumption with news is almost gone to zero. You know, I have some other ways I can kind of channel into what's happening, but I don't find that those sources are really informing me on what's happening. You know, there's an agenda of trying to, you know, make somebody really afraid, and then provide what you feel is the solution that has a sense of control and an agenda. And it's just, when you step away from that, like, mind control, you just feel so much more relaxed and at ease. And it's just like, oh, the sun's shining this morning. Oh, there's clouds in the sky. You know, it's like, that's what's happening. There's birds singing. So just that fear and anxiety and the connection, that was my big journey. I don't know if you know that I had chronic fatigue syndrome. That's how I came into this holistic consciousness, holistic health. So I had chronic fatigue syndrome for most all of my 20s. And I just really had to understand the mind-body connection, you know, which I didn't going into it, but that's how I kind of got out of it. We went through it. That was a part of it anyway, a big component of it. But there was this understanding of like, yeah, like the way these patterns I'm cycling in my head are making my body feel bad. And, you know, if I think, I mean, it's so simple, right? We've all heard it, but if I think positive thoughts, or if I think, you know, there is an effect on the body, and vice versa. So I'd love that to be one of the things that comes out of this, is people start to recognize that more, this mind-body connection, and how our thoughts affect our body affects our thoughts, and just being mindful of what we're exposing ourselves to. It's, you know, because there's toxic chemicals, there's also toxic psychological thoughts and things that we can be exposed to that are damaging to us. The news being a huge perpetuator of those.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm curious, like, I don't know, you know, how much you've talked about it already in your podcast, or, but like, was your recovery from chronic fatigue syndrome, was that all through a sort of psychological, emotional, spiritual approach, or?
So when I first got sick, I was going to doctors, and it was really um, disconcerting for me because I would go to these doctors and they basically like, I don't really know what's wrong with you. You know, do some tests. I don't know what's wrong with you, but try this pharmaceutical drug. Try this pharmaceutical drug. Try these antibiotics. Try this. You know. So it's kind of like, what is this? You know, this is like drug dealers. You know, they don't seem to know anything about what's happening, but they still want to give me drugs. And so then I moved off of that that hamster wheel and started to try to like learn on my own and explore on my own and started reading books and connecting to things. And that's what started me on the whole path of learning about the mind body connection, got me on the whole path of yoga, meditation, changing my diet, being more conscious about what I'm eating. Um, just explored a whole bunch of different holistic modalities, you know, acupuncture and some chiropractic stuff and all, whatever I could get whatever I could find really. I was trying and exploring. And it was an amazing journey. I mean, that's the thing I would say. That's one of the things I like to get across to people that either are sick right now, whether it's COVID or it's something else, or are afraid of getting sick, is that everything that we experience, what I've discovered, is here for the evolution of our consciousness. If we discover the opportunity that there is to learn the lesson that we're here, or lessons that we're here to learn, you know. So it ended up being something I'm grateful for, because everything I discovered and learned, I wouldn't have known any of it. I wouldn't be able to have this conversation with you know, if it wasn't for that journey that I had. So it was a holistic approach. It was mind, it was changing lifestyles, it was changing how I ate, it was, you know, learning to just listen to my body, take better care of my body, even changing relationships. That a lot of times that's a component, you know. Mm-hmm. So I like to look at when I work, I like to look at the whole person, you know. And I think that's what's disappointing to me about this approach with the pandemic is, you know, you're going to lock somebody, you're going to force somebody to lock down, you know, with these mandates and these laws and things. And you've pointed this out too, some things you shared, all the secondary ways that that's harmful to our health, you know, over a period of time. You know, just the lockdown has created such a rise in suicides and depression and obviously anxiety,
substance abuse,
alcohol abuse, drug abuse, poverty, huge. You know, it's huge. Obvious. It's like you have people in developing world, like a place like Thailand, like a place like, you know, or parts of Thailand that are very tourist dependent, you know, and then you go, you can't work for 6 months. You know, like most people in this world are living off a few dollars a day, the majority, over 50%, right? So you go, you can't work. Like I know a guy I'm connected to who's part of the Maasai in Africa. And they're really, really struggling since this lockdown, and people don't talk about it. You know, it's like Black Lives Matter. Well, like, you know, only if it's appropriate to the certain agenda, but it's like, you don't want to talk about all these people all over the world who are malnourished, the brink of starvation.
Yeah. And also like, who tend to be the guinea pigs for pharmaceutical trials.
Yeah. And then I'll almost never see a news story on this, but if I do, it'll be like, because of COVID. It's like, no, it's not because of COVID. It's because you made a lockdown. It's nothing to do with COVID. You made a lockdown that's preventing people from eating, you know, preventing people from making money to eat and support themselves. So that's something I really like to get out more. And you know, it's like, how are people supposed to eat? You know, and then you have the kind of 1/10 of the 1% that are just more and more billions of dollars are being made from this pandemic. You know, their wealth is increasing.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge component of like what's happening right now is the inequality, economic inequality, and how that's being exacerbated right now. And I think that's underlying a lot of the problems and things that are surfacing.
The economic disparity.
The economic disparity, and it's increasing.
Yeah. Right.
It's increasing. So, you know, if you look at Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos, all these guys are making more money. The pandemic is great for them. They don't want it to
Yeah.
end. I mean, the lockdown, it's not a pandemic, but the lockdown is great for them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they don't want it to end. And that's the thing too, is like, you know, then, you know, Facebook and Zuckerberg and all these, it's like, they want you, you know, we talked about Social Dilemma, the documentary, like they want you in front of the screen as much as possible. So being outside is bad because then you're not in front of the screen.
Right.
So you look at sort of all the ways that certain people's agendas are being supported in the and you say, oh, well, that's doesn't make any sense why it's happening. But then on a deeper level, oh, it does start to make sense why it's happening, but it's not for your benefit. You know, you're the one that's listening.
Right. Yeah. And with regard to the economic disparity, I mean, I just think the more desperate people become, the more dependent on the state they are.
Yeah.
And I think that is, you know, we're seeing something that is totalitarian. And, you know, it's interesting actually, like if you know, going back way early in the pandemic, you know, people started to put together the pieces and saw like, oh, okay, wait a minute. There was if you recall, the Event 201 simulation that happened with a novel. It was, you know, simulating a novel coronavirus. This happened a month before the, you know, the whole event took place.
October 2019.
Yeah. And so that was hosted, I think, by Johns Hopkins University, but I don't remember the direct relationship, but essentially it was conceived of by what was called the GPMD, or the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board, which was a collaboration between the World Economic Forum and the World Health Organization. And if you look at what the World Economic Forum is talking about right now with this whole Great Reset thing, and they basically, they have this long list of all of the ways that COVID, this whole event, is going to change the world. And it's all of the stuff that they've wanted for a long time. I mean, they explicitly say that their agenda, or what their mission is to basically shape public policy, like economic policy and, you know, every sort of public policy all over the world. And like, this is, I mean, by analogy, it's very much like what happened with 9/11, where, you know, when people talk about the pandemic, or, you know, by comparison, the false flag attack of 9/11, and it really does appear that it's a very similar sort of plot, or it's almost like it's a template where, like, if you look at what the people who I think engineered 9/11, what they wanted, they were talking about all these things they wanted, you know, for a couple years leading up to that event, and then boom, this event happened and they got everything they wanted. And that's kind of what's happening now too, is that the World Economic Forum has been like, we want to reshape the world in all these ways. Here comes COVID, now we get to do everything we want. And yeah, and it's not, I mean, these are like the wealthiest people in the world. And I'm not like one of these, like, you know, rich people suck, people shouldn't have money sort of people. But when we're talking about, like, you know, the wealthiest, you know, 1% of the 1%, these are the people shaping the policy on this planet. These are the people who, you know, were behind this pandemic simulation, which then turned into what we're in
pandemic
now.
Real pandemic.
Yeah. Or actually, I looked this up a while ago. The definition of simulation is really interesting, because it's relevant to Event 201 and the GPMD and their. I'm just going to look this up here. That whole plot, because they actually say that there are going to be pandemic simulations. So they explicitly say that. But yeah, so in dictionary.com, imitation or enactment as of something anticipated or in testing. So it's not just imitation, which is, I think, how we usually think of simulation, but enactment as of something anticipated or in testing. And so they explicitly said there's going to be a simulation this year. I don't know, man. It's happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's talk about conspiracy theory,
Yeah.
and like that's a really negative word out there in the collective right now. And we could talk about kind of like why that's conspiracy theory. But I mean, what drew me to about your writing is I feel like you do your best to uncover what's true and what's not true. And I don't feel like you have an allegiance to any particular, ideology or team, or everyone has to, nowadays it's like, are you left or are you the right? And it's like, we talked about that too. And it's like, you get it. But just someone that's interested in discovering what the truth is. Right. So conspiracy theory, there's a few things I'll share and then I'd like to get your take on it. So first of all, conspiracy theory, that word would mean it's a theory. So it means, if I'm saying something's a theory, that means I don't know that it's true or it's not true. It's my theory that I can offer the best I can based on facts and evidence that I've accumulated, right? And then you have people that just are kind of really wild. They're kind of, let's say they're, I don't know what the word would be, but they're kind of very loose with their conspiracy theories. So it's like everything's a conspiracy theory. Right away, everything this is this, that, this. It's like, and it's very kind of fear based. It's very kind of, it's like this paranoia. It's them. They're out there. They're doing this. They're doing that. They're doing that. And it creates this division. It creates this separation. So I don't subscribe to conspiracy theories unless there's facts and evidence for it. Otherwise, I don't find it valuable for my energy and my time. Now, with that said, there's so many conspiracies that have been proven to be true. I mean, so many throughout history that are, CIA documents show it. There's evidence that shows it. And then there's ones that even if you don't have the smoking gun, it's like almost, there's, lots and lots of evidence to point in that direction that conspiracies, they're just so regular and they're just almost like the norm, and the idea that, people who are wealthy in certain positions have an agenda. I mean, that's like kind of common sense. So anyway, my point is like I find that either pole isn't where I land myself. Everything's a conspiracy theory. Nothing's a conspiracy theory. It's like, no, the truth is in the middle somewhere. And we have to do our best to try to discover and explore it, case by case. Right.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I appreciate that, man. Yeah, it's tough. Like I sympathize a lot with people's frustration with conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorists. And I also think that it has probably intentionally become a way to dismiss information that counters the dominant narrative. I think that, of course, that phrase, some people say the phrase conspiracy theory has been weaponized. Sure, I think that's a fair thing to say. But let's like kind of reframe it as corruption, collusion.
Yeah, exactly.
Duplicitous behavior. I mean, we all know that corporations and governments have engaged in all kinds of terrible behavior that they don't want us to know about. I mean, that's, what can be called conspiracy theory. Then, of course, or what can be called conspiracy. And when something is intentionally obscured, if you want to get to the truth, you kind of don't have any choice but to theorize. I mean, even in science, you have a theory. Yep. It's like, and so people will be like, that's not based on facts, or, and some things are and some things aren't. And some things are, people like it's it's great to be good at pattern recognition, which I think a lot of people, I think I'm fairly good at it. And, you know, sometimes I'm able to put together pieces where it's like, okay, I can't prove this. I'm not going to state it as fact, but it's like this kind of a picture is emerging,
Yeah.
you know, from all these disparate facts. But I do think there's a real problem with disinformation, which I do think disinformation is intentional misinformation, just to be clear about that. And I think it's a huge part of how conspirators actually get away with their conspiracies. Like, you know, looking at 9/11, there are so many crazy theories about like, and I don't know what's true. That's the thing. And I think I really want to come back to that phrase, I don't know, but like, I mean, we're talking about like, you know, the whole, like the towers falling was a hologram, or they were hit by a laser and there weren't actually any jets. There were holograms, or, you know, like all of the witnesses were fabricated. And I mean, there's like stuff that's just like, I imagine was actually put out on the internet to discredit the whole idea or endeavor of questioning the mainstream narrative or the dominant narrative. But, you know, push aside these things that like can in no way be proven, and you have a lot of really valid questions about what happened that day. And actually information that, again, while you can't necessarily prove it, it's like if you have, you know, 20 New York City firefighters saying, yeah, we heard, you know, multiple explosions of the floors coming down, and there was an explosion in the basement, and like, these are credible witnesses, you know, and like, it's like, okay, how are you going to explain that away with the official narrative? So point being, it's like within anything, any kind of, you know, major event, I think it's always valid to ask questions and theorize. And when something fishy is going on, there are probably going to be a whole bunch of completely nonsensical theories that are put out into, you know, onto the internet for people who lack discernment and who for good reason do not trust what they're told by the media. To, you know, a lot of these people will just kind of latch on to any idea that sort of fits into their worldview without any discernment or further investigation. I mean, you know how people will share articles all the time without reading them. And I mean, I personally, like, part of my own, you know, attempt to be responsible on these things is I do read everything that I post. Yeah, at least, you know, and maybe more. Like, I'll follow up on, you know, what this expert has said in this article or whatever. But, you know, I mean, I think, you know, like you said, you came across like my writing early in the pandemic, and, you know, it resonated, and you're, you know, you're not the only person who has kind of expressed appreciation for there being a sort of, you know, level-headed, factually considerate approach. And I have to say that I had the time to do that, and most people don't, you know, and I sympathize a lot, like, with, you know, the average person with, you know, full-time job and kids and who knows whatever else going on in their life. Like, there's no time to even read the whole article. No, you know, no less dig into, you know, scientific papers and, you know, whatever else is available. I mean, I had the time to do it, and I got freaking burnt out, man, like, after a few months. And that's the other thing. Sorry to go off on so many little points here, but I do think that you know, one of the strategies that the so-called elites, or, you know, those who would conspire against us, employ is that with that, the volumes of information that are available, and especially with these sort of disinformation pieces, it's very easy for a person to become discouraged with, like, there's no way to make sense of all this information. And so what I'm going to do is I will latch on to this side or this side. That becomes my belief system. And then the other people are my enemy, you know? And so that's kind of another aspect of it that I think you touched upon a little bit, is the polarization that happens.
Major problem right now.
Major problem. And so much of it is really just based on belief. It's not really, there's not, you know, a factual basis for the vehement positions that a lot of people take.
Yeah, there's a lot I could say.
Yeah.
One thing that strikes me as you're talking is interesting is like, it's like we have more information than any time that I know of in history, you know, and yet it's harder than ever to figure out what's going on. So that's a really interesting dynamic that's happening. There's more. It's almost like it's its own part-time job if you're interested in really trying to figure out what's happening.
It is.
Like you said.
Yeah.
And then to me, like if there's something that would be valuable for someone listening to this to take away, it would be to not be afraid. And this is, I think, one of your messages you put out: not be afraid to question the mainstream narrative you're being given. You know, not be afraid to question it, and not to be afraid to not know. Right. So it's like someone questions the mainstream narrative, and then as soon as it's like a little bit shaky, then they jump to some other thing that is oftentimes just as based on nothing as the original narrative. So I think to be able to question, like, I don't know, speaking of 9/11, I don't know for myself exactly what happened, but I know that what they say happened is not what happened.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That much I can know from what I've looked and what I've researched. And then you have, like, you know, after that, it was just, you know, the whole weapons of mass destruction and the anthrax and this whole just propaganda campaign, which reminds me of what's happening now. It's a similar thing where it's like, there's an agenda here that was, you know, whatever happens, they don't care, but they want to get this agenda through, you know, and it starts to look more and more, you know, it's just like weapons of mass destruction. It's starting to look more and more obvious that, like, well, there's nothing there, but they have to keep pushing it because, you know, they got to get what they want to get out of it. In that case, it was the oil from, you know, and other things. But so there's this agenda, and here, to me, there's multiple agendas, but one thing is the vaccine and the profits that will come from the vaccine and the pharmaceutical industries. Yeah, the surveillance and the tracking and all that wants to be put into place. And there's, you know, and other things as well. But what I find too that's interesting, and I was thinking about this because somebody put a post up, a friend of mine the other day, about, you know, have you questioned the narrative and so forth. But what I find is there's actually, I think to get your take on this, is that there's a double narrative, essentially. So it's like they actually present you with two narratives, which is generally these days would be like the left and the right. So it's like, here's the narrative. The mainstream narrative is usually the liberal narrative. And then there's the alternative, which is the conservative narrative. But they're putting out both narratives. It's like, here's your two choices. Do you want Coke or do you want Pepsi? It's, I don't want either. You know? It's like, so that's what's so fascinating. Is like, you got to go beneath, like, oh, they're giving me the narrative. They're also giving me the counter narrative, but the counter narrative is part of the same narrative. Right. So it's like, am I left or am I right? No, I'm neither. I'm interested in whatever the truth is. I'm not aligned to any of these teams, aligned to narratives, you know?
Yeah. I resonate with that a lot. And actually, I've been in that sort of independent position for a very long time, which, I think has helped me to, you know, not to say like I'm the best, like like Trump, nobody's better at critical thinking than me. But you know, like, it's not to say like I'm the most discerning person or, you know, have the best critical thinking skills of anyone, but I do think that not having an allegiance to the right or the left is really beneficial in sense making, you know, and in you know, being willing to, you know, look beyond any particular headline, whether it seems to be in support of, you know, the general narrative I believe in or not. I mean, I'm just so aware, I mean, kind of, you know, backtracking a little bit, I'm so aware of how much bullshit, conspiracy theory, disinformation, misinformation is, that even when something like sounds like, oh yeah, that agrees with what I think, I need to look further into it before I'm gonna, you know, feel comfortable with it in any way being factual or even a sound theory, you know. Yeah, I think you touched on something else though. Yeah, it's like this, you know, it does appear just like, you know, the certain wealthy elites, bankers, you know, have funded both sides of wars, or like weapons dealers are selling weapons to both sides. You know, it's like you said, yeah, it's like these two sort of counter narratives are probably emerging from the same place. And I would say it's not the World Economic Forum, but it is that class of people who I don't think they're left or right. And, you know, like they're not interested, like they don't care. Like that's kind of a show that's being, you know, put out to have us essentially, I think, be weakened by the contention that's created through those opposing narratives.
And obviously, I mean, they create through the media racial conflict. That's an ongoing one. It's going on forever, you know. So have us fighting each other in that way. You know, all these ways that, to kind of get us distracted and focused on, you know, kind of pitted against each other. It's just to be aware of it and to be aware of how it operates. And there's certain like strategies that are used, and you can see them used in different ways when it's time to use them. So if you can catch and go, oh, I see what you're doing here. No, I'm not gonna take the bait on that. That's where, because I see people that get caught in conspiracy theories and they're just really in the kind of the fear and the paranoia and the anxiety, and, you know, it's not healthy. It's disempowering. But there's a way where you can go like, oh, I see what you're doing. I'm not going to take the bait. That's liberating and actually empowering. Right. And there's a difference there. So just to be able to kind of, because the idea is to be able to manipulate somebody a certain way or push the agenda, and just to be able to notice it and just like, nope, not going to bite that.
Yeah.
Man,
I gotta say, like, too, I think you brought up an important aspect of this, which is how terrifying it is for people I've experienced this myself. Fortunately, it was many years ago, but like sometimes I forget, you know, what I went through when I first started to look at things, especially after 9/11. I was already kind of primed for it, but after 9/11, I was like, something's wrong here. Started to look into things more and went way deep into a bunch of rabbit holes, and it kind of took over my life for a while, you know, and I probably was paranoid. And I think that it's only gotten more difficult since then because there is more, exponentially more information on the internet now. And so it's harder to, you know what to trust and all of that. But I do think it's important to, like, I don't know what to do or say about it, but I think that, you know, it kind of needs to be acknowledged, kind of like, you know, in the allegory of the Matrix with, you know, Neo waking up in the fields to what reality really is. It's horrifying, you know? And so, and I'm not saying like people should be horrified, because there's also, from my perspective, it's like, as fucked up as things are, it's also really beautiful. And as you alluded to, it's like everything is kind of for our growth and learning, and, you know, whatever kind of trials we go through. But, you know, I mean, I get that, like, learning about some things, it's, on one hand, it's so terrifying that people will choose to take the blue pill instead. And you know, it's uncomfortable to be exposed to, and to be kind of, to have the security of the reality we thought was reality taken out from under us. So some people will take the blue pill, but then others, you know, go into that rabbit hole and are just like freaked out. And I think it takes a while to develop discernment, at least in my experience, you know. So I just kind of want to speak to that being, I think, part of the natural process of waking up. I mean, Gurdjieff also, I don't know if you're, familiar with his stuff, but like he's kind of a controversial spiritual teacher, but very influential as well, from the early 1900s. But I mean, he really spoke about this a lot of like the average person isn't ready to see reality. It's too horrifying. And I mean, and speaking of which, when we get into like, I mean, some of the main conspiracy theory stuff around which many people probably lack discernment and then others will completely reject because it's so horrifying or so different from what they think reality is this whole thing about like, child sex trafficking and satanic ritual abuse and all that. I mean, I started looking into that 20 years ago. And now it comes out and people are like, oh, that's a right-wing conspiracy theory. It's like, no, a lot of us have been looking into this and talking about it for a very long time, and we're not right-wing people in any way.
They do that with that's what I was talking about. It's like anybody who's like questions it's right-wing, you're right-wing extremists, neo-Nazis. Yeah. It was like this, sorry to interrupt, but just thinking of this, there was this event in Berlin, I think it was like a month ago or so, where there was over 1 million people that came to, it was a rally essentially for freedom, right? And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. spoke there, and it was like, and there was a guy that made a video that was on the ground in the event talking about just like what a beautiful energy of love and, just peace and people of all different colors and people coming together and people hugging each other and dancing together, and it's great energy. And the New York Times did like just a few sentences on it that it was extreme right-wing neo-Nazis. There were lots of arrests. There was violence.
Right.
It's like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and it was only 30,000 people too. It was actually over 1 million people. So it's just, it starts to become really clear when you start to look at things. It's like, we're just being given propaganda.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Agenda. And I know that little bit of that story firsthand too. I was really involved in the protests, which were at the time, I don't know if they've been exceeded at this time or like leading up to the second Iraq invasion, there were massive protests.
Yeah.
Internationally, the most people on the street, like, at any given time, like ever in history. And the media was reporting like a fraction of the number of people that we had on the street. Yeah. And so that's really eye-opening. It's like, it's also a bit disheartening, honestly. Mm-hmm. I think that, and that's another thing that people, and I have kind of gone through at times too, is just being discouraged. It's like, I can put so much into, researching and engaging in activism. And then it's like, it's completely, my little effort or my little group's effort is like, feels like it's totally overwhelmed by the 6 major media corporations and whatever the hell they say, because people believe them, yeah. But I wanted to get back to what we were talking about before.
Gurdjieff. You're talking about Gurdjieff.
Oh yeah. And the waking up thing, that being horrifying, but no, I don't know. There's something else. That's all right.
Yeah. I always find it comes back if it's important, it'll pop back in there. But to me, what's coming up for me, and Gurdjieff is a good segue into it. The answer, so it's like you wake up and you're talking about how horrible it is, and I think it's like really horrible to like see the matrix that it's like the human condition. Yeah. The human condition and the suffering and the, do you remember?
The child sex slavery.
Oh yeah.
I just remember. Yeah. But
go ahead.
No. Go ahead. Because I can bring that back in.
Well, so it's like, it's how horrible and horrific the human condition is and how much suffering there has been and there is. And, but I think that there's something beyond that. And that's when you break out of the matrix. Right. And so that's why the work that I'm dedicated to and I put myself to is like, if I look at what is the solution to all this, and there's a few things that we, everything we're talking about is part of the solution. But to me, the ultimate, like kind of the root of the tree, so to speak, the solution is a spiritual awakening. You know, it's awakening in consciousness. It's Gandhi said, like, being the change we want to see, you know, and kind of just realizing who we really are, and then, you know, being an expression of that in the world. So it's like, yeah, you start to wake up to things you've been not wanting to look at, and it's really horrific, but there is something that's beyond that as well, which Gurdjieff pointed at that as well.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I do think that's the thing. You're familiar at all with the pathwork, Eva Pierrakos pathwork?
Not.
I'm happy to introduce you and your audience to this a little bit. To my mind and experience, it's just brilliant stuff. Eva Pierrakos was, I think, started in the 1950s. She started channeling something, and I'm a skeptical person overall. Like, I don't dismiss channeling. I think there's a lot of bullshit channeling, but regardless of whether she was actually channeling something or it was just some other part of her psyche that was speaking, you know, through her, I think is some of the most astute psychological and spiritual teachings ever. And she did these lectures for like 2 decades, I think. There are like 300 of them or so that were, you know, channeled by the guide. And I've learned a lot from them and have just been really inspired by them. But, you know, one of the things that came through her was this idea that, and I don't think it's unique to her or what she was channeling, but it was that, like, yes, there is duality in this world, and there's good and there's evil, and there's, you know, right and wrong on some level. And, you know, we don't want to deny that. But all of the pain, you know, that's caused by whatever it is, like your illness or, you know, all the terrible things happening in the world, it's all kind of meant to reorient us toward what is the greater good, which as they conceive of it, is sort of a level above the duality, which is sort of like, it's like, it's almost ironic because it's like a sort of a good that doesn't have an opposite. It's like, it's almost like the state of, I mean, as I see it, I don't know, but like the state of, you know, bliss that isn't really, that doesn't have an opposite. It's like a sort of higher equanimity. Like, oh yeah, there's good and bad, but it's all this one beautiful, awesome, mysterious thing, you know?
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was thinking about this the other day that, like, actually, I mean, I've thought about it a few times, especially over the past few months, but like, you know, it seems to me, like, I'm curious to hear your perspective on this too, but like, you know, fundamentally, like the fundamental spiritual realization is that it's all one thing, that there's no, like, we are not separate, you know, that's sort of an illusion, you call it an illusion or whatever, but like, this is all one thing. And I actually feel really fortunate that I was raised within a spiritual tradition to which that was fundamental, which was influenced by Hinduism, basically. But to me, it's always been the greatest solace that, like, just that realization of unity. And it's not like I constantly live in that. Like, I get triggered and hung up on shit and, you know, lost in consumerism and all kinds of stuff, like, you know, normal human stuff. But ultimately, I can kind of, like, when I go back to that fundamental unity, there is really, you know, a sense of, like, wonder and appreciation and you know, relief from the suffering. And so what I've been thinking is, like, you know, it seems like whatever, you know, even like if engaging in some sort of activism or, you know, a conflict on Facebook, I want to remind myself of this to do this too, but like, just to kind of come back to that perspective of, like, this is only, this is a limited reality that I'm engaging with right now. And if I can come back to that like grand unity of things, like there's so much just relief, you know, and like like the hostilities kind of become, just lose their weight and reality. I don't know if that made sense. It was the first time I've tried to articulate.
It makes perfect sense to me, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I totally resonate with everything you're saying, and that's what I'm saying. Like that's the solution, right? It's like if, you know, hypothetically speaking, if the whole world woke up to that consciousness, that would, you know, we'd be in what we call heaven or nirvana or whatever. So to me, that's a big part of my work, is like being a support for people to awaken to that consciousness. And then, as you said, in oneself, you know, doing one's best to be grounded in that consciousness within oneself. Because I think the people that we think of or as evil or causing suffering, they're not in that consciousness. They're in a consciousness of separation and duality, and, you know, they're not happy people. I don't feel them as happy people. I feel them as really lost, really out of alignment, really distorted, and just perpetuating that suffering onto others. And there's this kind of this hole inside of like needing more, you know, this kind of like, and so can we make that shift of like recognizing that we are one with that, and it's inside us and we're inside it, and maybe someone else can feel it in us and can open to that, you know. So to me, that's the spiritual. They don't even have to use the word spiritual, but that's what it opens to. You know, that's the ultimate truth.
Yeah, beautiful. I resonate with that. Oh man, there are a few pieces in there I want to pick up on. Like, yeah, it's another perspective I've really been kind of stepping in and out of over the last few months, like seeing the evil is not out there, you know, like, yes, it's like on some level, this reality that we're in, and, you know, all the conflicts we experience, like there's some reality to it, but in some way, like, I mean, I know that even just on a practical level, I participate in the evils of the world. I mean, you know, all of my devices, none of these things are ethically produced. You know, I can, you know, sometimes behave in ways that that aren't, you know, living in my highest values. And it's like, I'm not innocent, you know, and I think that, it's a trap really for anyone. I mean, everyone thinks they're on the right side of things, you know, and that it's those other people that are the problem.
That's a big part. That's a big part of the problem right now. I feel like is like, I'm on the good team. The other side's, you know, the conservatives are evil. The liberals are evil. You know, every single problem is caused by them. You know, and it's like that's just creating this illusion of the separation and division, and there's no real wisdom that's going to come from that.
Yeah, and even like just from like a spiritual perspective, I mean, I think shit, man. I mean, I can be you know, inflated and grandiose, certainly at times, and you know, or think I'm superior to other people, and I mean, that's just like, in some way, I do think there are certain, you know, hierarchies in things, and that's fine. That's just part of this realm that we're in. But like, you know, I think a lot of people who sort of get into some sort of spiritual thing can then think like, oh, I'm awake and these people are asleep. If only they would wake up, you know. And I think that's part of the sleeping, really, is to imagine that, you know, it's those other people who need to come up to my level or something. And that kind of, you know, not that I'm any expert in it, but it has me want to return to this idea of like humility and just like, I don't know, you know. And there are things like sometimes when I write, I've experimented with different things. I'm really, you know, like trying to develop myself as a writer. Really, it's kind of a new thing for me over the last couple of years to be spending a fair amount of time writing. And So I've experimented with different rhetorical styles. I mean, I tend to like want to be sort of diplomatic and non-hostile, non-offensive. Am I boring you, Brian? Is that
No,
no.
love it. Totally in it.
See you yawning. But there, you know, I mean, I definitely attempt often to be diplomatic for rhetorical effect because I actually want people to listen. I don't want to just like, I'm not trying to preach to the choir and then have, you know, kind of create or play into these different polarized sides. But there is also like, I try to remember that ultimately, like, I don't know. I can say like, I have this evidence, this is my opinion. There's nothing wrong with having an opinion, you know? But I think that part of what's like, we're not given, it's like I actually think that the classical virtues have become like so foreign to the contemporary Western person that like even the idea of humility, it's like, what does that even mean? You know, we don't know really, like we haven't been trained as our ancestors were in, you know, in living virtuous lives. And I think, yeah, it's a big thing is that like we, in the insecurity of not knowing, we try to become insistent, you know, that because there's some security in that, like, oh, I can hang on to this idea and I can be right and those people are wrong. But I think it's a huge part of like where we're going wrong is just this, like, you know, everyone thinks like is certain that my position is the right position.
Totally agree. Yeah, it's like we're gonna bring, you know, the kind of the news thing is like we're gonna bring this person on from the left and this person on from the right, and they're gonna debate each other and, you know, try to prove each other. And of course, no one ever's like, oh, actually, you're right, and I'm gonna end this segment agreeing with you. You know, it never doesn't work like that. But what if you had like, I don't know exactly what you said. Like, I don't know what's true. You don't know what's true. I'm coming in with some perspectives or some ideas or some, but I'm interested in exploring with you what's true, you know, and it's an ongoing exploration, you know, and having those kind of like dialogues together with people and having those kind of conversations. And there's very few places where you can access that kind of like, I have some friends, you know, and I feel like you're a new friend that we can just kind of, I feel like you're open-minded, I'm open-minded, and we can kind of just look at things and explore it together. And I think more of that would be really healthy because this kind of leads into like vision, right? Because one of the things that I really see is like, it's really easy right now to be like, I'm against this, I'm against that, I'm against racism, I'm against whatever. It's everybody's against something, you know? But it's like, where are we going? What's the vision, you know? And the crazy thing is, and like amidst all of this, if you really feel into like what we want as human beings, I mean, we all pretty much want the same thing, you know, and it's pretty simple and straightforward what we want. And what if we just talked about more like exploring what's the strategy is to get there? You know, like everybody wants clean water. Everybody wants clean air. I mean, maybe a few psychopaths don't, but 99.9% of people do. Everybody wants like, you know, community and, you know, loving connections and great art. And, you know, it's like, we'd like to have in a world where there's no poverty and there's no homelessness and everyone has something to eat, you know? And so it's like, why don't we just talk about how we want to move towards that instead of this wasting energy in this other way of just like, I'm this position, you're that position, and let's just, you know, prove each other, you know, this kind of ego games.
Oh man, yeah. When you said you like put out that idea of like, what if, I was imagining on TV, like, you know, what if these two people came together rather than in this sort of oppositional thing, you know, and talk about like how do we, you know, or like, what is the commonality here? What is it that we, you know, are wanting to create? And I felt like so much relief in my body, like, oh, that would be so beautiful if that was the norm. And then, you know, I love what you were saying about this, like coming from the vision of what we want. It's huge. Yeah. And I really feel like that's kind of like, what if this whole pandemic situation was approached from that, like, we want good health. Let's start there. Like, rather than we want to fight and be safe from this virus as the prime objective, it's like, oh, we want good health. Oh, okay. Now we can start talking about, supplements and like exercise and, all that.
And I think I totally agree. And I think also really important to say that health isn't just fighting a virus. Like there's mental health, there's emotional health, there's psychological health, there's physical health, there's spiritual health, there's relational health, there's health of the environment, so there's all these, and they all affect each other. Yeah, they're all interconnected. You had a really good essay, I think that was the first one I saw of yours. You were critiquing the WHO, the World Health Organization. It's like, are they really interested in health? They really, it's like, wait, what, if they're really interested in health, then why don't they, talk about what we're talking about here and, how to, so that kind of conversation of like holistic health, like holistic thinking of like, maybe the lockdown will protect some people from getting infected from the virus than otherwise would have, maybe. But how about all the other ways it's adversely affecting people's health, And on the whole, if to me, looking at it on the whole, it's like, if I look at the whole totality of it, it's like, well, people's health are being so much more adversely affected by the lockdowns and the mandates than they would otherwise be if they would be exposed to the virus. And I just want to say, because we haven't said it yet, and I think that you feel totally this way, because one of the things that happens, and it's important to acknowledge this, when people are critiquing the lockdown, is there's this thing of like, well, you don't care about people who got sick, and you don't care about people who died, and you're so insensitive, and you're selfish, and you're self-centered, and it's like, I care a lot about, I actually know a lot of people who have gotten sick, and I do know, at least I knew people who know people who've, I don't know anyone personally who's died, but I know people who know people who've died from it. So I don't think that's true. I mean, I think it's a false accusation. The people that I know that are critical of the lockdown are people that have looked at things deeply, studied it, and they care a lot. And they just feel like this is a better way to approach it than the alternative.
Right. Absolutely, man. I mean, I thought about writing a post at one point where I was like, I don't spend all my time researching this shit because like I feel in some way deprived or insulted by this thing. Or because like, dude, first of all, I'm a freaking hermit. I like staying home, I like being home. I live in a beautiful place. I have everything I need. I have no complaints for myself. Like, I'm super fortunate. And so, to suggest that it's like, I'm just being selfish by spending all my time, like, researching this and trying to like, offer a different perspective. It's just, it's absurd. I mean, I get, and it's also funny though, that it's interesting that there's this argument, which I think is sort of a, perennial question when it comes to like law and political policy, is like how to balance individual rights with the so-called common good. And that's a valid conversation to have. I don't think it's like, I'm certainly not on the side of like, I mean, honestly, I don't really subscribe to any political theory and I'm not super well versed in them, but I mean, I think it makes sense for people to, sometimes forego one's own pleasure or, or desires in order to, provide benefit to others. Sure. But it is interesting when people make arguments for the liberties that are enshrined in our Constitution. And then other people are like, you're selfish for wanting what the Constitution says. Like, wait, what country are we in here? Like, it's very strange actually to me that how far people have gone psychologically to the side of essentially like, we must sacrifice everything in order to keep this, tiny segment of our population that's susceptible to this virus safe.
Who could just be safe by quarantining. That's the thing that's so crazy. Like, we don't have to do anything for them to be, no one's making you go outside. No one's making you not wear a mask. I mean, wear a mask if you want to. You stay inside the rest of your life if you want to. That's up to you, but don't make people who are young and vital and healthy act like they're sick, and they have to wear, mandatory to wear a mask, and
totally.
yeah.
And I have to say again, man, people who are, well, I think we all should be taking vitamin C. If I can take another couple of minutes to talk about that, I want to mention one other reason why, because I think it's important. So, something that people don't understand. But in addition to that, it's like, why don't we have, as one example, people who are especially vulnerable nebulizing hydrogen peroxide? Just one other thing, that it's like, you can kill any pathogens that enter your respiratory system with nebulized hydrogen peroxide, which anybody can do at home, but our medical system is completely ignorant of and resistant to these things that are free, well, not free, but extremely inexpensive, yeah, that anybody can do for themselves. It's like, they're practically demonized. But I mean, it's just like, nope. I honestly think very, very few people really need to quarantine. But if they want to, they can,
Yep. Yep. And people know their bodies pretty well. Like, that's the thing, is like, this one size fits all it just doesn't, you have one person that's desperate financially. They're going to lose they're not going to be able to pay their rent. They're going to be homeless if they don't make money, and they're in a lockdown, and they, and it's like, and they're healthy. And they can't, and then when people aren't like able to contribute their purpose and do what their gifts are, it really, that's where the depression comes in, and this kind of, suicidal thoughts and things like this. And then, like, I'll talk to people and they'll be like, I have, like one person that, something with their organs, I don't remember the exact details, or someone who's a heavy smoker or different things, and they feel like they need to be more careful. Okay, like, I totally respect that. I'm not gonna, that's great. Like, whatever you feel is good for you, listen to your body and follow what you feel is best for you. And everybody has a different situation. But I think that's where the answer is. It's like, and then that's assuming that this is really what it's even about, which mm-hmm. I think we both question that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, having that sense of, and that tension between individuality and community is a really interesting conversation if we'd actually would have it. It's actually like, people just choose their side and they demonize the other side. But obviously, yeah, there's community and individuality, and they both have value. I would say, from my experience, the best community comes as a community of individuals. Does that make sense? Like, people that are really connected to themselves and can voice what they want, what they don't want, what they need and what they don't need, and communicate that honestly and sincerely, and it can be heard. And then you have a real sense of community that's true sense of community based on individuality. Mm-hmm. Whereas something like what's happening in China right now, unfortunately, is like, people don't have their own autonomy, don't have their own individuality. So it's not a true sense of community. It's just authoritarianism. It's fascism. It becomes something that's not community, even though it's called community.
Yeah, right.
So it's like, root in the individuality, and then from individuality, then community is important from that space of individuality.
Yeah, and I do think that, sure, people have selfish tendencies, but I really think the vast majority of people actually care about other people and want to act in people's best interest. But what happens is, with this whole thing, it's like with the mask debate. Oh my God. I honestly have not picked a side on that whole thing. I'm certainly like, I think I'm against mask mandates for sure. But I'm not like, and I am perplexed by seeing people walking down the street with no one near them wearing a mask, or in their car wearing a mask. Like, it's heartbreaking to me. Like, and I wish I would like to talk to each one of those people. Like, what is going on? Why are you wearing the mask? I'm just like really curious, curiosity, that's another important thing, I think. But with regard to like I think that the attitude that a lot of people take, which I understand, is like having something forcefully imposed on oneself without it being, you know, rationally justified. Like, if I'm going to tell someone you must do this, like, I want to be sure to give them a really compelling case for why it's a good idea. And I don't think people got that with the masks. It's been so much conflicting information. And so, you know, naturally, I think a lot of people are going to say, this is bullshit. You can't force me to wear a mask. And then the other people who are convinced are going to say, you're selfish. But it's really like, I don't think that, I mean, it's such a complex, ridiculously complex situation with this whole mask debate. But I just think, like, a lot of the people who are accused, some people probably who refuse to wear a mask, yeah, sure, maybe they're selfish people. But I think a lot of people are just not convinced, you know? And it's not that, and it's also looking out for the welfare of others, theoretically. I mean, from my perspective, I actually think that I prefer to not wear a mask until someone tells me you must wear a mask in my establishment. A lot of the time I do that because I want to encourage other people also to not wear masks, because I think that's actually for the common welfare. And so, you know, other people will see that as, you're one of these bad, selfish people. But from my perspective, I'm actually doing the better thing for everyone, you know?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think one of the things that hasn't been looked at so much, there can be debate about, does the mask prevent infection or not? That's the whole thing. But another thing that's not looked at is, I'm curious how the mask is affecting actually a sense of community.
Yeah.
Right? So like where I live here, there's no outdoor mask mandate, but I'm noticing actually more people are wearing masks. It's like actually increasing. It might be even like 50-50 now outside.
Oh, wow.
So I'll go for a walk, and I know I'm just kind of just observing. I was over a period of days, the people who are wearing masks, they're like kind of like, they don't look at me, they look down. There's this kind of like tightness. There's this fear, you know, fear of a stranger essentially, right? This person can hurt me, this person. And the people who aren't wearing masks, it's like, hey, how you doing? You know, it's like openness and connection and community. And so like, you know, how's that going to affect people? And then you think of these small kids growing up in this kind of environment, you know, of like, you know, this kid can kill you. They can, you know, be afraid of everybody. That's my issue with the mask, is like, if this idea of like, I don't trust you, you could hurt me, I'm afraid of you, you can make me sick, you can kill me. You could look at the same person and assume the best. You could, right? You see what I'm saying? Like, it's like, you know, and we don't shake hands anymore. That's another thing. I saw this show, which obviously was from prior to 2020, but this guy enters a room. For some reason, it really struck me. I almost had like tears, right? Guy comes in the room and he's like, how you doing? I'm Bill or something. And he shakes everybody's hand. And it's like this way of like saying, it's like this way of saying like, I've come here in good faith, trust me, I trust you, we shake hands,
Yeah.
But now we're in this thing of, it's like, I don't trust you, unless I already know you, if I live with you or something. So that's a whole other thing. It's not even really being discussed or looked at. Maybe this could be something to write about at some point soon, but like the psychology of the mask wearing,
Oh, totally. Yeah. And just the social and emotional impact of
and
it.
the social distancing. Yeah.
It's dehumanizing. I mean, a huge part of being human is being a freaking mammal. I mean, really is actually, it extends even beyond mammals, but just body language communication. And so much of it is in the facial expression. It's an innate way of communicating. Like even, with our pets or other animals, like we can see what they're feeling in their facial expression. And to completely remove that, I mean, the eyes still are expressive. Like I can't say it's like 100%, but I mean, it is very dehumanizing. There's a big part of just connection is just seeing each other's faces. And yeah, with the contact, like I feel you. Yeah. It's like, there's I mean, I even noticed, man, like where I'm not afraid of, the virus or, I'm not naturally inclined to like keep distance from people. And I more or less intentionally don't do that because I'm trying to like not fall into this thing. But even me having that perspective, I notice because it is the social expectation that I have started to become acculturated to that too, where I will sort of naturally or automatically start to move away from someone if they're approaching me or something. And that's not a conscious thing. It's a cultural thing. And that's like, even, just looking at like the difference between like in American culture, we actually tend to expect more space, between ourselves. Whereas you go to like Asia and it's just like, people are just right in each other's spaces all the time, it's a different cultural expectation. And now our culture is shifting unconsciously, subconsciously to,
or intentionally maybe.
well, intentionally, but I think that even just noticing in myself, because consciously I don't want to do that, but even subconsciously I'm already being acculturated to it. It's sad.
Have you looked at the whole transhumanism potential component of this, and like that being potential like agenda of, because you mentioned dehumanizing, right? And that's the word that's the one word, if I could sum up in one word what I feel is happening, it's like there's a dehumanization, we're being dehumanized, right? And it's like, so I don't know if you say anything about that, but it is an interesting thing of like dehumanization, more onto the screen, more onto technology, more onto all of this stuff. And there's this rise of technology, computers, and like they're kind of more efficient than human beings. They do the job quicker and faster, and they will more so and more so as we advance.
So becoming obsolete.
Yeah.
I wrote that piece. I wrote a piece a few months ago about the Microsoft 666 patent, which is very much a transhumanist. You remember that one?
Say more about it.
It's so fascinating. Well, so the patent application that Microsoft put out or submitted was, I don't remember what the letters were, but there's like two letters, then 060606. It's like 666, and it's for a cryptocurrency system that interfaces with the body, which is so, it can easily be, reference to the biblical reference of the 666, like it's in the hand or in the forehead, and we put microchips in the hand, and then we have now all of this tech that's going here, at least it's not necessarily the forehead, but in this region, but I mean it's definitely like it's one of the steps in the direction of transhumanism, where even our currency and our ability to exchange is tied into our biology. Even, I mean, the patent application is talking about the movement of body fluids, being in some way regulating one's, like it's basically a reward system. So like you'll be rewarded for having certain, biological functions. And I mean, it's really, really creepy stuff. But that came out, in this year, like among other weird things. So I think that agenda is moving rapidly forward.
Yeah, it's fascinating to just kind of like feel into. I mean, you definitely have this sense with, I'm thinking of Bill Gates, and as soon as the lockdown, or right around that time, he comes in and is like, this is the new normal, and this is the way it's going to be, and until the vaccine, we'll be in lockdown. And it's like, who is this guy? Is he an elected official? Is he a doctor? It's just, so, but it feels like, I think whatever your perspectives right now, I think everybody kind of senses that we're in the midst of something big, and there's some kind of we're in the midst of a big transition, and where's it going to go? And part of where it's going to go is up to us, right? I think that's part of our message is like, what do we want to create? What is the vision we want to create?
Yeah.
There are agendas that are different people have in place. But we can give ourselves to doing our best to make sense of the world around us each day and speak our truths. And in speaking our truths, we start to resonate with people that are in like frequency, like you and I have come together. And then I see the next step is like, what do we want to create together? So I'm seeing like small pods of people, you know, creating community together. And then, you know, they're kind of like the seeds for the new earth. They're kind of like these pods for the new earth that kind of become networked together. So that's my positive vision of what's possible. Anything else that you want to share as for what you see as far as what's possible, or visions of what's the good that can come out of this potentially?
Yeah. I really appreciate you coming back to that and the, you know, visioning what we can create and looking at the opportunity in the situation. That was actually, I think, the first thing I wrote about the pandemic, when I was like, I have no idea what's going on, but I'm confident, because I'm an optimist, that there's an opportunity here, you know, and it's something I've been thinking about again lately. And I think there are a lot of opportunities, and one of them is, or, you know, positive things that can come from this. And the main one I'm focused on right now is that people can learn about taking care of their health.
Yeah.
And can learn about things like vitamin C, like hydrogen peroxide, like emotional regulation and the impact that that has on our health. Excuse me. I think that, you know, the model of medicine that we've been living with, you know, for the last 100+ years is damaging. I mean, there are good things about it, but you know, that's my hope, and so that's what I'm focused on mainly right now in terms of my writing and research, is just to help to expose the actually scientifically supported and valid information in the realms of you know, natural remedies, but also, and closer to nature remedies, but also the power of healing intention. And there's a ton of research about this, which has very broad implications for, I mean, the whole way that we, you know, not only regulate our health, but interact with all of reality. And so again, that's part of why I really appreciate you bringing us back to that, is I do think it's important for us really to maintain a vision of what is the world we want to live in, you know, and keep moving toward that, rather than just constantly reacting and fighting against the threats and insults that come at us.
Beautiful. Anything else you want to share, or you want to ways people can stay connected to you or be in contact with you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you're going to post this on Facebook. Yeah, I mean, probably, you know, people can connect with me there. I have a Medium profile where I've posted some things. I actually need to bring my writing all more into one place. I have another website, which is supernature.me, where I've tried to kind of go in a different direction, kind of still working on formulating that. But I think that's probably the best link, because what I'm going to do is bring together all of my writing there. Yeah, it'll be on all different kinds of topics. So I may even do a podcast and invite you on.
Yeah, you might.
Yeah.
Just fine. All right, Aaron. It's been a real joy. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thank you. My pleasure.